A Memphis restaurant, Saturday night, October. The dining room is full and warm and running perfectly. Every table attended, every glass filled. The kind of place that makes you feel the world outside doesn't exist. In the corner, a large table near the north windows. 8 people, champagne already poured. A woman at the center of it, composed and deliberate, beginning a speech she has rehearsed for days. One chair sits empty at the far end, facing everyone else. Then the front door opens, a man walks in, quiet, unhurried, dark jacket, good watch. He moves through the room like he has walked it 1,000 times because he has the chef, steps out from behind the pass, extends his hand, says something, low, clear, carrying just far enough to reach the corner table. The woman mid-speech stops. The champagne sits untouched, and somewhere in that room, something that has been building for a very long time is finally ready to be served. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Cedric Mitchell was sitting at the counter in his Germantown apartment. Coffee in hand. Window open. Memphis was doing what Memphis does in October. Cool air, pale light, the city waking up slow and easy. He had been up since 5. Not because anything was wrong, just because early mornings belonged to him in a way the rest of the day never quite did. No staff, no vendors, no invoices. Just the coffee and the quiet and whatever thinking needed to get done before the world started asking things of him. His phone buzzed against the counter. Jeffrey Lewis Cedric picked up on the second ring. Jeffrey was his executive chef at Henley's. Had been for 7 years. He was 35 years old and ran a kitchen the way a good point guard ran a floor, calm, decisive, always 3 steps ahead of whatever was about to go wrong. Cedric had hired him when Jeffrey was 28 and still carrying a chip on his shoulder from a restaurant that had passed him over for a promotion he had clearly earned. That chip was gone now. What replaced it was something quieter and more useful. Competence. The kind that doesn't need an audience. Jeffrey didn't call without a reason, Mr. Mitchell. His voice was careful, measured. The tone of a man choosing his words before he opened his mouth. I think you should know what kind of reservation just came through. Cedric set his coffee down. Tell me, reservation came in last night. 8 guests, Saturday evening. 7:45, a pause. It was placed by a Patricia Johnson. Cedric knew that name. He had known it for 6 years. The notes field, Jeffrey continued. Whoever placed the booking typed something in the occasion line. What did they write? Jeffrey read it out plainly and without decoration. Vanessa's fresh start. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car moved down the street. Memphis kept going. There's a guest name on the list, Jeffrey said. Listed as V. Bryant, Cedric didn't say anything for a moment. And the seating arrangement? Specified by the party placing the reservation. 8 seats. 1 guest at the north end of the table. Jeffrey paused again. Facing the rest, there it was. Cedric understood exactly what that meant. You put a man at one end of a table when you want the whole room looking at him, when you want him to feel the weight of everyone else facing the same direction. It was the seating arrangement of a verdict. Of a room that had already decided something and was now prepared to deliver it. Champagne? Cedric asked. Ready at the table on arrival. Their request, Cedric picked his coffee back up, took a slow sip, looked out the window at the pale Memphis roofline. Jeffrey, sir, proceed as normal. Full service. Nothing changes. Understood. And Jeffrey, Cedric's voice stayed even. Thank you for calling. He set the phone face down on the counter. He sat there for a long time. The coffee went lukewarm. The light outside shifted from pale gray to something closer to gold. Memphis moved through its without any particular interest in what was turning over in the mind of the man sitting alone at that counter. Cedric Mitchell reached for his legal pad, and he started writing. He had not always been a man who wrote things down. That came later. That came from years in professional kitchens, where the difference between a good service and a disaster was often nothing more than whether someone had written down the right information at the right time. A prep list ignored. A dietary restriction missed. An order called wrong because the ticket wasn't read carefully enough. He had learned early that the most expensive mistakes in any kitchen were the ones that could have been prevented by 20 seconds of attention and a pen. He applied that lesson everywhere now, so he wrote the name, V. Bryant. He wrote the date, the time, the seating arrangement as Jeffries had described it. The occasion listed in the notes field. Then he opened his laptop. His full name was Victor Bryant, 40 years old, senior portfolio manager at Bryant Capital Management, a private wealth firm his grandfather had founded in 1958 in Memphis. His LinkedIn profile showed a man in a well-cut charcoal blazer, standing in front of what appeared to be a sailing vessel at a marina somewhere. Clean jawline, confident posture, Vanderbilt undergraduate, a master's from Georgetown, the kind of professional profile that had been carefully tended over many years. Cedric looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at Vanessa's Instagram account. He had never had reason to look at it before, or rather, he had never allowed himself the reason. There is a difference between those two things, and he knew it. Victor Bryant had followed her 9 months ago. She had followed back 7 months ago. Cedric scrolled down, found the photograph from May, a rooftop somewhere in the city. Vanessa in a white linen top, sunlight behind her, laughing at something off camera. Beautiful. She had always been beautiful. Below the photograph, a comment from an account he now recognized, and 3 words. He didn't need to read them twice. He closed the laptop. His hands did not shake. His face did not change. His phone never stopped ringing. He sat at the counter in his Germantown apartment with the morning light coming through the window and applied the same discipline he had been applying in professional kitchens for over 20 years. In a kitchen under pressure, the most dangerous thing you can do is react before you understand the situation fully. You burn things that way. You waste product. You make decisions that cost you more than whatever the original problem was worth. He did not react. He went back to his legal pad and kept writing. Here is what Patricia Johnson did not know about the man she called. The caterer. CMG Hospitality Group owned 11 restaurant properties across Memphis, Nashville, and Birmingham. The company had been incorporated in 2009 under a name that carried Cedric's initials and his grandmother's maiden name. In the fiscal year just ended, those 11 properties had generated $8.4 million in revenue. Henley's, the restaurant at 1140 Madison Avenue in Midtown Memphis. The restaurant where Patricia Johnson had just placed a reservation for Vanessa's fresh start, was the flagship property of that group. The building that housed it had been purchased by CMG Holdings LLC in 2015 for $2.1 million. It had since been assessed at $2.9 million. The ground floor held Henley's. The 2 floors above held commercial tenants whose leases were managed by a property company that reported to CMG. Patricia Johnson had chosen her daughter's goodbye dinner venue without researching who owned it. She was not alone in that. Vanessa didn't know either. The only people who connected the letters CMG to the quiet man in khakis, who drove a 10-year-old Civic, were the people who worked for him. Cedric had been in kitchens his entire life, not as a figure of speech, not the way people say they live somewhere or breathe something. Literally. Since he was 7 years old, standing on a step stool next to his grandmother Donna Jackson in the house on Parkway North. Donna Jackson was 83 years old and had lived in that craftsman house on Parkway North for 54 years. She had cooked every meal from scratch for as long as Cedric could remember. Every morning, every evening, every Sunday, every holiday, the refrigerator was never full of things that came in boxes. The stove was never cold for long. She kept a cast iron skillet on the back burner that had been seasoned since before Cedric's father was born. That skillet now lived in Henley's kitchen. Jeffrey knew to leave it where it was. Some things you don't move. Cedric remembered the step stool. He remembered the height of the counter above him and the weight of the wooden spoon and the way his grandmother's hands moved. Unhurried, sure, doing each thing in the right order without rushing toward the next one. She never cooked like she was in a hurry. Not once in all the years he watched her. She had told him something once. Standing over a pot of red beans she had started the night before. Patient hands make a perfect dish. Rush it and you ruin it. He was 8 years old. He had not understood it fully then. He had filed it away the way children file things. Not in their minds, but somewhere deeper. In the place where the lessons that really matter go to wait until you're ready for them. He had been ready for them at 19. He had entered professional kitchens at 19 because there was nothing else he wanted to do. And he was not the kind of man who spent his life doing things he didn't want to do. It started as dish work, hot water and grease, and the steady physical reality of a restaurant running at full capacity. There was nothing glamorous about it. There was also nothing dishonest about it. You either showed up and did the work or you didn't. The dish station didn't care who you were. From there, prep, then line, then sous chef at a mid-sized place in Cooper Young that taught him how a kitchen fell apart when the person at the top wasn't paying attention. He was paying attention. He was always paying attention. Then, the counter, a small soul food counter in Orange Mound that had been struggling for 3 years. When Cedric took it over at 26, the owner was an older woman named Ms. Reeves who was ready to close, and had heard through someone who knew someone that this young man from Parkway North actually knew what he was doing. She had been right. Within 18 months, people were driving across Memphis for that counter. Not because Cedric had changed the recipes. He hadn't changed much. He had just applied everything his grandmother had taught him since he was 7 years old, standing on a step stool. Patient hands, right order, no shortcuts, and a deep, unshakable belief that the person you were cooking for deserved your full attention. That counter was where he understood what Donna Jackson had been teaching him all along. The person who controls the recipe controls the meal. He had carried that understanding out of Orange Mound and into everything he had built since. CMG Hospitality Group had not appeared overnight. First property in 2009, a small midtown spot that nearly broke him in year 2 when he miscalculated a lease renegotiation and spent 6 months eating that mistake. He didn't blame the landlord. He didn't blame the market. He sat down, figured out where his thinking had gone wrong, fixed it, and moved forward. His accountant, a methodical man named Thomas who had been working with Cedric since the second property, had once told him, "Most people who build something real lose it once before they keep it. The ones who learn from losing are the ones still standing at the end." Cedric had learned second property, third. Then the building purchase in 2015, the move that would become Henley's, the flagship, the place Jeffrey had run for 7 years with the cast iron skillet on the back burner and the corner table near the north windows, reserved for private occasions that required ceremony. By the time Cedric met Vanessa Carter at a Memphis Arts nonprofit gala in 2017, CMG owned 6 properties. By the time Patricia Johnson placed her reservation for Vanessa's fresh start, it owned 11. No property carried Cedric's name. He had made that decision early and had never revisited it. The company name was his initials and his grandmother's maiden name, and the anonymity was not a game or a secret. It was simply the way he preferred to work, quietly, without performance. The food was the product, the staff was the asset. He didn't need his name on the door to know the door was his. He had met Vanessa Carter at the gala in 2017. She was on the planning committee. She moved through the room the way people move when they've grown up in rooms exactly like that one. Comfortable, natural, belonging without effort. She laughed at something he said early in the conversation. Genuine laughter. Open and unguarded. He had thought, standing in the Memphis Art Museum on a warm October evening with a glass of sparkling water in his hand, that she was the most at-ease person he had ever been in a room with. They dated for 18 months. She was smart. She had a real estate license and a good eye for properties, which he appreciated even when she applied it to things he didn't entirely care about, like the neighborhood they should live in and the kitchen finishes they should choose. She was warm with people. She remembered details about the lives of people she'd met once. She had a laugh that could change the temperature of a room. He had loved her. That was not in question. What had also been true, what he had known at some level and had permitted himself not to examine closely, was that from the beginning, Vanessa's family had a way of framing their relationship that sat slightly sideways from reality. Patricia Johnson was gracious, always gracious. The kind of gracious that has been practiced until it requires no effort. She had first called him, the caterer, at Thanksgiving in their first year. He had come with Vanessa to the family dinner at the Hayes home in East Memphis. Patricia had introduced him to 2 aunts with a smile. "And this is Vanessa's friend Cedric. He works in food and hospitality." Cedric had not corrected her. He had not corrected her the second time, or the third, or across the 6 years of holiday tables that followed. Not out of weakness. Out of a certain kind of patience that he had carried since childhood. The understanding that a person who has already decided what you are will not be changed by your insistence on being something else. You show them, or you don't. But you don't argue. Raymond Harris, Vanessa's father, had been more subdued about it. He was a retired attorney, 67 years old, and he had the manner of a man who had spent decades in rooms where people said things carefully. He had always been polite to Cedric, had always asked about the restaurants with what seemed like genuine interest, but Raymond had never pushed Patricia when she called Cedric the caterer, and there was a kind of complicity in that silence that Cedric had noticed and filed away. Stephanie Harris, Vanessa's older sister, had a version of Patricia's graciousness with less practice behind it. She was warm on the surface and evaluative underneath. She had once, in the kitchen of the Hayes house, asked Vanessa within Cedric's earshot whether he had ever thought about doing something more scalable. Darnell Cooper, Vanessa's brother, was the least complicated of them. He simply had no particular opinion about Cedric either way, which was almost refreshing. Cedric had married Vanessa in spring of 2018. They had moved into a house in Midtown that she had selected. She had good instincts for space and she's loved the neighborhood. He had paid for it without discussion because it was within reason and she wanted it and he had believed, and standing in that house in Midtown on a warm afternoon, that they were building something worth building. Before the ceremony, he had signed a prenuptial agreement. His attorney had drafted it. Vanessa had reviewed it with a lawyer her family had recommended, a man who had apparently billed 90 minutes on the matter and characterized the entire CMG structure as standard small business protection. CMG had been small in 2015. It was considerably less small in 2018. It was not small at all by the time anyone sat down to think carefully about it. The agreement was specific. CMG Hospitality Group, its subsidiaries, all real property held in the company's name, designated as Cedric's separate property, excluded from any marital claim, not subject to equitable distribution. The language was precise because Cedric's attorney had made it precise. It had remained unchallenged because no one on the other side had thought to look at it carefully. For most of the 6 years, the life had felt close enough to write. There were things to love about it. The house on warm evenings, the way Vanessa moved through the world. Sunday mornings before the day made demands. The version of himself he was when things between them were good. But there were also the other things. The particular quality of Vanessa's absences in year 4, the way she had started, citing her family's opinions not as one input among many, but as established facts. A reference to an event she'd attended that she hadn't mentioned beforehand. A work function, she'd said. The way the explanation had arrived already packaged, complete, not the way honest explanations arrive. A name, V. Bryant, that had appeared in her phone once, briefly, in year 5. Mentioned once as a former colleague. Not mentioned again. Cedric had seen these things. He had made a choice not to examine them closely. He knew that about himself now. He had been patient in the way his grandmother had taught him, but patient toward the wrong object. Patient toward the hope that he was misreading what he was seeing. Patient in the way a man is patient when he already knows the answer and is not ready to act on it. There was a difference between that kind of patience and the kind his grandmother had meant. He understood the difference now. Cedric pulled the joint account records that afternoon, all 14 months. He went line by line. The pattern started in May, same month as the Instagram comment, 3 transfers to an account he didn't recognize, 2 in the low 4 figures, 1 for $9,200. He wrote each one on the legal pad with the date, the amount, and the account number the transfer had gone to. A charge from a hotel in Nashville. A weekend in early June that Vanessa had described as a girl's trip with her college friend Angela. He had not questioned it at the time. Angela was real. The friendship was real. He had simply believed the explanation because there had been no reason not to. There was reason now. A streaming subscription that neither of them had discussed. Small, monthly, but consistent. Starting in April, he documented everything. Dates, dollar amounts, cross-references to the calendar on his phone where he had noted Vanessa's explanations at the time. He was not building a case with emotion. He was doing what he had always done in a kitchen, reading the situation clearly, identifying what he actually had, and figuring out what the next correct move was. He went back to the prenuptial agreement. He kept his personal documents in a folder in the 3rd drawer of his desk. He had not opened that folder in over a year. He pulled the prenuptial agreement out and sat down and read it from the first page to the last. 3 sections were underlined in pencil, his own marks, from the day he had first reviewed it with his attorney. He read those sections twice. CMG Hospitality Group, its subsidiaries, all real property held in the company's name, designated as separate property of Cedric Arthur Mitchell, not subject to equitable distribution, excluded from any marital claim, clear language. His attorney had been careful. He had been specific. He had built the structure precisely because Cedric had asked him to, and because Cedric had understood, even at the beginning, that the things he was building deserved to be protected carefully. What he understood now, reading it again, was that the protection had held. He set the agreement on top of the legal pad. He sat for a long time in the quiet of his office with everything arranged in front of him. Memphis was running its Tuesday outside the window. Traffic, people going about their business. A city that had no particular interest in the reckoning taking place in one room on one ordinary afternoon. He opened a new folder on his laptop. He named it Saturday. Then he picked up his phone and called Beverly. Lorraine Mitchell. She had practiced family law and asset protection in Memphis for 17 years. Her office was near the Peabody Place area and operated without a lobby and without appointment delays. She answered her own calls when her assistant was away from the desk. "Lorraine," his voice was steady. "Are you available this week? I need a consultation." "Wednesday morning," she said. 8 o'clock, I'll be there." He set the phone down. He looked at the folder on his laptop. He looked at the legal pad. He looked at the prenuptial agreement, sitting at the top of everything. Then he made a second cup of coffee and went back to work. There is something that the people at that holiday table had never understood about Cedric Mitchell. He was not a quiet man because he had nothing to say. He was a quiet man because he had spent 20 years in environments where noise was cheap and clarity was expensive. A kitchen at full service is one of the loudest environments a human being can work in. Heat, metal, orders moving through the air, equipment running, people calling out in shorthand. And underneath all of it, the constant requirement that you not lose your head. You do not manage a kitchen by being the loudest person in it. You manage it by being the clearest, by knowing what you have, by knowing what each station is doing, by seeing the whole board at once and knowing which fire needs attention and which fire can wait. Patricia Johnson had called him the caterer for 6 years. She had been in his restaurant dozens of times and had not once thought to ask who owned it. She had looked at what Cedric presented. Khakis, a 10-year-old Civic, measured answers at holiday tables, and she had read those as the limits of the man. She had seen the presentation and assumed it was the full story. This was the mistake people made when they confused surface with substance. The surface was a choice. The substance had been building since he was 7 years old, on a step stool in a kitchen on Parkway North. The surface was what you saw. The substance was what you found out on a Saturday night when the lawyer walked in. Here is the honest part. Cedric had known something was wrong before Tuesday morning, before Jeffrey's call, before the booking notes, before the legal pad and the laptop and the folder named Saturday. He had known for close to 2 years, not with certainty, not with documentation. The way you know a dish is slightly off before you can identify exactly which element is wrong. Something in the flavor, something in the texture. An instinct built from years of paying close attention to the way things are supposed to work, so that when something isn't working quite right, you feel it before you can name it. He had felt it in year 4. The quality of Vanessa's absences had changed. Not the frequency. She had always had her own life, her work, her family commitments, and he had always respected that. The quality, the particular texture of the explanations that arrived when he hadn't asked for them. The way she had started making small references to things he didn't recognize. The name that had appeared once in her phone. He had looked at all of it, and he had made a choice. He had told himself that he was being careful, that he was not the kind of man who made accusations based on suspicion. That patience meant waiting for clarity before acting. All of that was true in its way, but there was another truth underneath it. He had not wanted to be right. That was the honest part. The part that did not make him look good, and that he had no interest in softening. He had looked at the signs and chosen to file them away, rather than examine them, because examining them would have required him to confront something he was not ready to confront. A marriage he had believed in. A version of his life he had thought was real. His grandmother had told him once, years before any of this. When someone has already decided to leave, they always leave traces. Not because they're careless, because part of them wants you to know. So they don't have to be the one who says it out loud. He had known what that meant. He had chosen to wait, and now he understood. Sitting in his Germantown apartment on a Tuesday morning, with a legal pad in front of him and a folder named Saturday on his laptop, that he had been patient in the wrong direction. Patient hands make a perfect dish. But patience pointed at the wrong thing doesn't make anything. It just delays what was always going to happen. He did not dwell on this. He was not a man who dwelt on things. He was a man who assessed situations, identified the next correct action, and moved. That was what 20 years in professional kitchens had made him. Not hard, not cold, just clear. The situation was clear now. Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock. He drove to Lorraine Mitchell's office near Peabody Place, parked the Civic, took the elevator to the 4th floor with the folder under his arm. Prenuptial agreement, CMG financial summaries for the preceding 3 years, joint account documentation with the annotated transaction records, and the printed booking notes Jeffrey had sent him Tuesday evening. Lorraine was already at her desk. She was 52 years old and wore reading glasses on a brass chain, and had the focused attention of a woman who had heard most things twice and remained interested in the new ones. She poured her own coffee and did not offer him one. This was not rudeness. It was efficiency. She had things to read. He laid everything on her desk in order. She read through it without comment. He did not interrupt. When she finished, she set the prenuptial agreement on top and looked at it. CMG exclusion is airtight, she said. Her voice was direct and without drama. Premarital. Separately held. Nothing commingled. I'd have to look harder to find a cleaner structure. She picked up the joint account documentation. These transfers are modest in scale, but they're documented. Dates, amounts, destination accounts. That's marital waste. Includable. She set it down and picked up the booking notes. She read them once. Then she read them again. The occasion is listed as Vanessa's fresh start. Correct. She looked at him across the desk. Her expression did not change, but something behind it shifted slightly. The look of a professional who has seen a great many things and has just encountered a new variation. They booked a goodbye dinner at a restaurant you own, in a building you own, with a chef you employ, a beat, and called it her fresh start. The chef called to warn me, Cedric said. Lorraine set the booking notes down. Here is the legal picture, she said. The prenuptial stands. CMG is not a marital asset. The joint account transfers constitute marital waste. Documented. Includable in the filing. She paused. What your wife and her family have designed is a confrontation on your property, using your staff, for which they have not accounted. She looked up. Do you want to file before Saturday? Or let Saturday happen first? Cedric considered it. He thought about the corner table near the north windows, the champagne ready on arrival, the seating arrangement, him at one end facing everyone else, the occasion written in the notes field. Vanessa's fresh start. Let Saturday happen, he said. Lorraine nodded once. Then I'll have a paralegal at Henley's by 8:15. Bring me everything Jeffrey can document about the reservation and the table setup. A pause. And Cedric, he looked at her. Be entirely yourself when you walk through that door. He stood. Picked up the folder. I'll see you Saturday, he said. He did not go back to the Midtown house that day. He drove instead to Parkway North. He had been driving this route since he was old enough to have a reason to go anywhere. Past the corner where the barber shop used to be before it became a nail salon, then became an empty storefront, then became a barber shop again under different management. Past the church on the corner of Parkway and Willett, where his grandmother had sung in the choir for 40 years. Past the vacant lot where a hardware store had been when he was small. The Craftsman house looked the way it had always looked. Well kept. Front porch swept. The roses along the fence line attended to with the specific care of someone for whom this was not a chore but a practice. The green door his grandmother repainted every 2 years without fail. She was 83 and still cooked every meal from scratch and still kept the same cast iron skillet on the back of the stove and still wore the same kind of house slippers she had worn since before he had memories of her in shoes. She poured sweet tea without asking. They sat at the kitchen table in the arrangement they had occupied at intervals Cedric's entire life, her near the stove, him with his back to the window, the afternoon light coming in over his shoulder. He told her the shape of what had happened, not the figures, not the legal structure, not the documentation and the annotated transactions and the folder named Saturday. Just the shape, the human shape of it, the way you tell someone who loves you something difficult. By finding the center of it and saying that part clearly, she listened without asking questions until he was done. Then she was quiet for a moment. I knew that girl thought she was lowering herself, she said finally, plain, without malice. I saw it the first time she came to this house. The way her eyes moved when she looked at what I had, she meant the house, the neighborhood, the particular quality of a life built without the kind of money or address that announces itself. She was polite, Cedric said. She was always polite, Donna said. That's not the same thing. She refilled his sweet tea without getting up. The pitcher was already on the table, the way it always was. You know what I always told you, she said. He did. Patient hands make a perfect dish. She looked at him steadily. But a person who's already on their way somewhere else. They don't follow the recipe, they rush. And when you rush, you burn something, Cedric said. On the way out, she finished. He looked at his hands, the table. The afternoon light. I knew before Tuesday, he said. I saw things and I chose not to look at them. Donna was quiet. She did not move to comfort him immediately. That was not her way. She let things settle before she spoke. Then you were patient toward the wrong thing, she said finally. Patience doesn't mean you close your eyes and wait. Patience means you do each step right. In the right order. At the right time, she looked at him. You knew. You waited when you should have looked. Now you're looking. That's not failure, Cedric. That's how it actually works. He sat with that. Now go do the next right thing, she said. And do it in the right order. He stayed for another hour. He ate a small plate of food she put in front of him without asking if he was hungry. Red beans and rice, started the night before, the same dish she had been making since before he was born. He ate it slowly. He was not in a hurry. When he left, she was standing at the door the way she had always stood at the door when he was leaving. He turned once at the end of the walk. I'll come by next week, he said. I'll have food ready, she said. He drove back through Memphis in the early evening. The city had that particular quality it gets in October. Something settling into itself, the summer finally done, the air clear enough to see a long way. He drove the long way back, through Orange Mound. Past the block where the counter used to be, it was something else now. A dry cleaner, then a cell phone store for a while, now something with a hand-painted sign he couldn't read from the street. The building was the same, the shape of the doorway, the particular width of the windows. He recognized it the way you recognize something that was important before you had the vocabulary for important. He had cooked his first real meal in that building. Not the first meal anyone had ever taught him. The first one that was entirely his call, his timing, his decision about what the dish needed. He had been 26 years old, and the building had smelled like old grease, and the refrigerator had needed replacing, and Ms. Reeves had handed him the keys with the expression of a woman who was hoping for the best and prepared for the worst. He thought about that sometimes. About what it had cost to be 26 years old in a struggling kitchen, with nothing to prove it except your own hands. And the things someone had taught you when you were small enough to need a step stool to reach the counter. He drove past it and kept going. Friday morning, Lorraine called with the full picture on Victor Bryant. The Bryant capital name was genuine. 66 years in Memphis. A real firm with real clients and a real history in the city's financial community. Victor's grandfather had built it from nothing, the way men of that generation built things. Through relationships and reputation, and the kind of work that doesn't have a shortcut. Victor himself was a different matter. The family assets were held in trust, substantially inaccessible to Victor individually until the trust's dissolution conditions were met. Tied to the death of Victor's grandmother, who was 81 and in reasonable health. Victor's personal investment accounts held approximately $280,000. His home in East Memphis was mortgaged at 82% of assessed value. His salary from the firm was $190,000 annually. Ald, professional, not wealthy. Not by any measure that matched the blazer and the sailing vessel and the impression he created at charitable events in this city. He is a presentation, Lorraine said. Not a position. Understood, Cedric said. Filing is complete. CMG summaries are attached. Joint account documentation is in order. Paralegal will be at Henley's no later than 8:15 Saturday. Thank you, Lorraine. One more thing. Yes. A pause on the line. Brief. The pause of someone adding something that is not strictly legal advice but is relevant nonetheless. You've built something real, she said. Most people in that room Saturday will be seeing it for the first time. Make sure you let them see it clearly. He ended the call. He sat in the Germantown apartment with the evening coming through the window and thought about what she had said. Make sure you let them see it clearly. He thought about Jeffrey, 7 years in that kitchen, the handshake that had a language to it. The language of two people who had built something together over time and knew exactly what they were standing in. He thought about the corner table near the north windows. The champagne, the occasion listed in the notes field. Vanessa's fresh start. He had the recipe. He had always had the recipe. What he needed now was Saturday. That evening, he drove to the Midtown house. First time in 4 days. Vanessa was in the kitchen when he came in. The house had that particular quality of a well-kept space. Clean surfaces. The right things in the right places. The particular smell of a home that a woman with good instincts had arranged carefully. He had loved this house. He still loved it in the way you love a thing that is about to change. How was your day? She was at the counter with a glass of water. Calm. Natural? Fine, he said. Long, are you hungry? Not particularly. She didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't explain. They moved through the ordinary motions of an evening at home with the ease of two people who had done this enough times that the motions themselves carried the weight of the missing conversation. He ate a small plate of food she had already prepared. He thanked her. She smiled. He went to his study and looked at the folder named Saturday one final time. Everything was in place. He thought about what his grandmothers had said. Patience doesn't mean you close your eyes and wait. It means you do each step right. In the right order. At the right time. He had done every step, in order, at the right time. The kitchen was prepped. The service would run correctly. What was left was Saturday. The quiet man's table. Wednesday morning came in cold. The kind of cold Memphis gets in mid-October that isn't brutal yet, but carries a warning in it. A reminder that the easy weather is done and something harder is coming. Cedric had been awake since 5. He had made coffee, dressed carefully, and driven downtown in the dark, with the legal pad on the passenger seat and the folder in the back. Lorraine Mitchell's office was on the 4th floor of a building near Peabody Place that had been renovated sometime in the 90s and not significantly touched since. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk and an elevator that moved slowly and with conviction. The kind of building that communicated permanence without trying too hard. He was 5 minutes early. She was already at her desk. Her office was not decorated for impression. No awards on the wall, no framed photographs of handshakes with important people. What it had was order. Every surface held exactly what it needed to hold and nothing else. Files in sequence. A single legal pad squared to the corner of the desk. A coffee mug with no logo on it. A brass chain holding reading glasses that she had already put on when Cedric walked in. "Sit down," she said. He sat. He placed the folder on the desk. She opened it without ceremony and began reading from the top. He did not explain as she read. He had learned this from 20 years of running kitchens. When a capable person is reading, you let them read. Adding words is noise. She didn't need noise. She needed the information to be accurate and complete, and it was. She read the prenuptial agreement first. Turned pages without marking them. She read the CMG financial summaries for the 3 preceding fiscal years. Revenue, property holdings, subsidiary structure, assessed values. She read the joint account documentation with his handwritten annotations. She read the booking notes Jeffrey had printed and sent over. When she finished, she set the prenuptial agreement on top of the stack. She looked at it, not at him, at the document itself. Then she spoke. "CMG exclusion is airtight." Her voice carried the particular flatness of someone delivering a verdict they have no doubt about. Premarital. Separately held. Nothing commingled. Not a dollar of marital money went into the company. Not a single asset held jointly. She looked up. "I would have to search hard to find a cleaner structure." "My attorney was thorough," Cedric said. "Your attorney was excellent." She picked up the joint account documentation. "These transfers are modest in absolute terms. But modest doesn't matter. What matters is the pattern and the documentation." She set it down. 3 transfers to an unrecognized account. A hotel charge in Nashville on a weekend the account holder described as a girl's trip to her husband. A subscription charge neither party discussed. She looked at him. "That is marital waste. Documented, annotatable, includable in a filing." She picked up the booking notes last. Ride them again. Set them down. "The occasion field says Vanessa's fresh start." It does. "They placed this reservation at a restaurant you own, in a building you own, with a chef you've employed for 7 years, a pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and called it her fresh start. The chef called to warn me the morning the reservation was placed." Lorraine sat back slightly. "Not much. Just enough to indicate that this particular detail had registered. Here is the full legal picture," she said. "The prenuptial agreement is valid and operative. CMG Hospitality Group and all its holdings are your separate property and cannot be touched in any divorce proceeding. The joint account transfers constitute marital waste, minor in scale but substantial as documentation of conduct." She folded her hands on the desk. "What your wife and her family have designed is a confrontation staged on your property, using your staff, at a venue they selected without knowing you owned it." She let that sit. "Do you want to file before Saturday? Or let Saturday happen first?" Cedric had been thinking about this since Tuesday morning. He had thought about it while the coffee went cold. He had thought about it on the drive to Parkway North to see his grandmother. He had thought about it in the Midtown house on Thursday evening, sitting across from Vanessa at a dinner table, where neither of them said what was actually happening. Filing before Saturday was clean. It was legally sufficient. It would get the job done, but it would also mean that Patricia Johnson never walked into Henley's, never sat at the corner table near the north windows in the restaurant she had chosen without understanding what she was choosing, never experienced the moment when the information arrived. All of it at once, in the room she had selected for her daughter's send-off. There was something in that room that he had earned. Something that Patricia Johnson had been denying the existence of for 6 years. Every time she smiled and called him the caterer, He was not a vengeful man. That was not what this was. But he believed in accurate information. He believed that people should understand clearly what they were dealing with, and there was a version of accuracy that required a room and a moment and the right documents placed on the right table. "Let Saturday happen," he said. Lorraine nodded once. A single, clean acknowledgement. "Then I'll have a paralegal at Henley's at 8:15 on Saturday. Have Jeffrey document everything about the table setup. Seating arrangement, champagne placement, the booking notes as received." A beat. "And Cedric," he met her eyes. "Be entirely yourself when you walk through that door." She held his gaze for a moment. "Don't perform. Don't explain. Just be the man who owns that room." "Because you do," he stood. Collected the folder. "I'll see you Saturday," he said. He shook her hand, walked to the elevator, pressed the button and waited while the elevator made its slow, certain way down to him. Outside Memphis was fully awake, traffic on Beale. A delivery truck double-parked on 3rd. Someone arguing cheerfully on a phone at the corner. He got in the Civic and drove. Thursday afternoon, Cedric was at his desk at the Germantown property, the one he used on late nights and early mornings, the apartment above one of the smaller CMG locations. When Lorraine called with the Victor Bryant accounting, he had his coffee and his legal pad, and the afternoon light coming through the east-facing window, at the angle that meant it was somewhere around 4 o'clock. "I have the full picture," Lorraine said. "Go ahead. Bryant Capital Management is a legitimate firm. 66 years in Memphis. Real client base, real history, solid professional reputation in the regional wealth management community. His grandfather built it genuinely and it has operated genuinely since." A pause. Victor himself is a different question. Cedric wrote nothing. He listened. "The family assets are held in a multi-generational trust. Victor is a named beneficiary but cannot access the principal assets independently. The trust dissolves on the death of his grandmother, Evelyn Bryant, 81 years old and currently in good health by all available indicators. What Victor controls personally is his salary and his individual investment accounts, which are, his personal investment accounts hold approximately $280,000. His home in East Memphis, the historic property on Goodwin, is mortgaged at 82% of assessed value. He carries that note at a payment that represents roughly a third of his take-home salary." Cedric wrote one number on the legal pad. Circled it. "His annual salary from the firm is $190,000, Lorraine continued, "which is a real salary, a professional salary. But it is not the salary of a wealthy man. It is the salary of a man who works for a wealthy family's business and lives in a way that implies access to wealth he does not individually control." A moment of quiet on the line. "He is a presentation," Lorraine said. "Not a position," there it was. Cedric sat with that for a moment. Victor Bryant had shown up at a charitable event in Memphis in the right blazer, from the right family name, with the right story. And Patricia Johnson, who had spent 6 years calling Cedric the caterer because he drove a 10-year-old Civic and wore khakis, had looked at that presentation and read it as substance. She had judged by the surface. It was the same judgment she had applied to Cedric and gotten exactly wrong. The great irony of it was not lost on him. Patricia had spent 6 years looking at a man who owned 11 restaurants and a $2.9 million building and had read him as working class because he chose not to perform wealth. And then she had looked at a man who owed 82% on a historic home and read him as the better option because he performed it well. The mistake wasn't the conclusion. The mistake was the method. You don't evaluate a dish by the presentation of the plate. You taste it. "Thank you, Lorraine," he said. "Filing is complete and in order. Everything will be ready Saturday." He ended the call. He sat at his desk and looked at the legal pad. He had written one number and circled it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned the legal pad face down on the desk and poured the last of his coffee and watched the Memphis afternoon move toward evening outside the window. He did not feel satisfaction. That was not quite the right word. What he felt was something closer to clarity. The picture was complete now. Every element documented, every moving part understood. The kind of clarity you feel when you've read a complicated recipe all the way through and you know exactly what you're making, what order the steps go in, and how the whole thing is supposed to come together. He had the recipe. He had always had the recipe. There was something he had thought about more than once in the days since Jeffrey's call. It wasn't about Victor Bryant's mortgage or Patricia Johnson's miscalculation or the booking notes with their occasion fields spelling out Vanessa's fresh start. It was about what his grandmother had said years ago, not this week, but years ago, when he was still young enough that the lessons were landing in real time rather than arriving fully formed in memory. The person who controls the recipe controls the meal. She had been talking about cooking. She had been talking about what it meant to be the one in the kitchen who understood how a dish was supposed to work. Not just the steps, but the reasons behind the steps. Why the beans soaked overnight instead of going in dry. Why the seasoning went in at a particular stage. Why patience wasn't just a virtue, but a technical requirement. But she had also been talking, in the way she often talked about things, about something larger, about the difference between people who understood what they were building and people who assumed they understood, based on what they could see from the outside. Patricia Johnson had sat at Henley's tables across 6 years of holiday gatherings. She had ordered from the menu without knowing she was ordering from a menu that a man she called the caterer had approved. She had admired the space, the corner table near the north windows, the warm service, the quality of the food, without connecting any of it to the man sitting quietly at her daughter's side. She had looked at the surface of Cedric Mitchell for 6 years and read it as the whole story. The whole story was considerably different, and Saturday, she was going to read it. Here is the part that requires honesty. Vanessa Carter was not a villain. Cedric knew that. He had known it through 6 years of marriage, and he knew it now. And he would know it when the lawyers were done and the paperwork was signed and the life that they had built together was divided and inventoried and assigned. She was not a calculating woman. She was not cruel. She had not married him as a scheme or stayed with him as a deception. She had loved him in the way she knew how to love, which was the way she had been taught. And that was where the real story was. Vanessa had grown up in the Hayes household in East Memphis. Raymond Harris was a retired attorney. Patricia Johnson ran the household and the family's social life with the efficient grace of a woman who had turned these skills into a form of art. There was money, not extravagant money, but comfortable money, and there was status, and there was a deeply embedded understanding that the two things were connected. Patricia had not raised her daughter to be unkind. She had raised her to be discerning, to understand that the choices you made about who you spent your life with reflected on who you were and what you valued. That a good match was not merely about affection but about compatibility, and compatibility included practical realities. She had passed this understanding to Vanessa not through lectures, but through the accumulation of small moments. A comment at the dinner table, lightly delivered, about a cousin who had married below her station. The way Patricia's voice shifted almost imperceptibly when discussing certain families versus others. The particular warmth she reserved for men who showed up in the right clothes, from the right neighborhoods, with the right resumes, and the particular quality of her politeness toward men who didn't. Vanessa had absorbed all of it, not consciously. The way you absorb the shape of the house you grow up in. It becomes the shape of your thinking without your realizing that you've been shaped. She had met Cedric at the gala in 2017, and she had genuinely liked him. His steadiness, his humor, the way he listened to people, the way he moved through the world without needing the world to acknowledge him. She had found those qualities attractive in the beginning. Over time, she had begun to find them confusing, not because they had changed. They hadn't. Cedric was the same man at year 5 as he had been at year 1, but Vanessa had changed in the way people change when they spend enough time absorbing a particular message. She had started to hear her mother's voice in her own head, and her mother's voice asked questions that Cedric's qualities didn't answer easily. What does he actually have? Where are you going with this? Is this really what you imagined for yourself? The questions were not fair. She knew that at some level, but knowing something isn't fair and being able to stop it from shaping you are two very different things, and Vanessa had not been given the tools for the second part. When Victor Bryant appeared at a charitable fundraiser in April, polished, easy, carrying the weight of a family name that Patricia Johnson had referenced admiringly at dinner tables for years. Vanessa had not made a decision. She had moved towards something that felt like an answer. Not an answer to "is Cedric wrong for me?" She had never quite asked that question cleanly. An answer to "what does a life that my family respects actually look like?" That was the question she had been carrying, and Victor Bryant, at first glance, looked like an answer to it. She had not understood that first glances and long looks are different things. She had not understood that a man can present as the answer to a question and be, on closer examination, the wrong answer. She had not had time yet to understand those things. She would have time, but not until after Saturday. Cedric had thought about Vanessa in those days between Tuesday and Saturday, more than he had thought about Patricia or Victor or the prenuptial agreement. Not with anger. He had moved through anger and come out the other side of it before he had even picked up the legal pad. What remained was something more honest and more complex. He grieved the thing he had believed the marriage to be. He did not grieve it loudly. He was not a man who grieved loudly. He grieved it in the early mornings in the Germantown apartment, in the quiet before the city woke up and started asking things of him. He grieved it in the way you grieve something you loved that turned out to be different from what you thought it was. Not with bitterness, but with a steady, clear-eyed sadness that you let move through you without trying to stop it. Because stopping it doesn't help. It just delays. He had learned that from his grandmother too. Let a thing be what it is. Don't make it worse by refusing to look at it. He looked at it. He let it be what it was. And then he kept moving. Thursday evening, Cedric drove to the Midtown house for the first time in 4 days. He had told Vanessa he'd been staying at the Germantown property. Late nights, early mornings, a stretch of operational work that made the commute easier. This was not entirely untrue. It was also not the full truth. She had not pressed him on it. He had noticed that without comment, the house looked the way it always looked. Midtown craftsman, brick walkway, the porch light on because Vanessa had always kept the porch light on when she expected him. He had loved that about her. The small, consistent consideration of it. The fact that she kept the light on. He stood on the porch for a moment before he went in. Memphis was doing its October evening thing. Cool air, the smell of leaves starting to down, a dog barking somewhere on the next block and then going quiet. An ordinary Thursday. Nothing about this block had any idea what was happening in the houses on it. He went inside. She was in the kitchen. A half-empty glass of white wine on the counter. The stove on low. Something simmering that smelled like it had been going for a while. Hey, she looked up. I wasn't sure what time you'd be back. Later than I meant to be, he said. He set his keys on the hook by the door. A habit so old he no longer thought about it. He would not be setting his keys on that hook much longer. And he knew it, and she did not know it yet. And the distance between those two states of Makunich was the whole weight of that Thursday evening. How was your day? She asked. Long, he sat down at the kitchen island. Good though. Birmingham project is coming together. This was true. The 12th property, the Birmingham location that Jeffrey had been helping him design the menu for over the past 18 months, was on schedule. The lease was signed. The kitchen equipment was ordered. Jeffrey had walked through the space twice already and had opinions about the flow of the line that were characteristically precise and characteristically correct. You seem tired, Vanessa said. A little. She turned down the stove, set a bowl in front of him without asking. The simmering thing, which turned out to be a simple white bean soup with greens. It was good. She was a good cook in the instinctive way of someone who had grown up around food without ever working in a professional kitchen. He ate slowly. She sat across the island with her wine, and they talked about nothing in particular. Her sister Stephanie's daughter had a recital coming up. Raymond had seen a cardiologist and gotten a clean bill of health, which had relieved everyone. She had a showing on Friday for a property in Cooper Young that she was optimistic about. Ordinary things, the soup of an ordinary life. He ate it and tasted every element of it. The cannellini beans soft from long cooking, the greens just right, a brightness at the end that came from a lemon he had seen on the counter on his way in. She had always known how to use acid to finish a dish. He had told her that once, early in the relationship, and she had laughed and said she'd learned it from watching a cooking video at 1 a.m. and had been applying it indiscriminately ever since. He thought about that laugh. He did not let himself stay there long. She did not mention Saturday. He did not mention Saturday. This was its own kind of information. If she had known nothing, she might have mentioned it. I'm having dinner with the family this weekend. You're welcome to come. The silence around it was the shape of what she knew and was not saying. He thanked her for the soup. She smiled. He helped clear the bowls, and she washed them and he dried them, and they moved around each other in the kitchen with the ease of two people who had shared a kitchen long enough that the movements were memorized. He went to his study. He did not close the door all the way. He sat at his desk and looked at the folder named Saturday on his laptop. He did not open it. He had read everything in it enough times. He knew what was in it. He knew how Saturday was going to go. He looked out the study window at the Midtown street. A couple walking a dog. A neighbor's kitchen light on across the way. The ordinary architecture of ordinary life going about its business on a Thursday evening. He thought about what his grandmother had said. You were patient toward the wrong thing. Patience doesn't mean you close your eyes and wait. It means you do each step right, in the right order. He had done the steps. He had done them in order. What remained was Saturday. He sat in the quiet of his study, in the house he had paid for, and thought about the cast-iron skillet on the back burner at Henley's and the step stool on Parkway North, and the 20 years of early mornings and late nights that had built the thing Patricia Johnson was planning to dismiss over champagne in 3 days. He was not afraid of Saturday. He was ready for it. He stayed in the study for an hour. Heard Vanessa move through the house, the television on low in the living room for a while, then off, then the sounds of the bedroom, then quiet. He sat in the quiet long after she had gone to sleep, not with drama, not with grief that needed an audience, just sitting with the last ordinary evening of a chapter of his life, acknowledging what it had been, not making it worse than it was, not making it better, letting it be what it was. Then he got up, turned off the study lamp, walked through the dark house. He paused in the kitchen doorway. The bowls were dry on the rack. The counters were clean. The porch light was still on. He turned it off on his way out. He slept at the Germantown apartment. He was up at 5:15 without an alarm. This was not unusual. He had woken before 5 most mornings for 20 years. It was simply how he was made. Once his mind engaged, it did not disengage easily, and his mind engaged early. He made coffee. The apartment was small and clean, and entirely his own. He had used it for years as a place to land on long nights and launch from on early mornings. It had nothing unnecessary in it. A good coffee maker, a desk, a bed, a window that faced east and caught the first light well. He stood at that window with his coffee and watched Memphis come on. It was still dark when he started watching. There was a quality to pre-dawn Memphis that he had always found useful for thinking. The city quiet enough that you could hear your own thoughts without competition, but not silent. There was always something moving. Always a light somewhere. Always the evidence that other people were also awake, also beginning their day, also preparing for whatever their particular Saturday held. He drank the first cup at the window. He thought about Jeffrey, about the Birmingham property, about the community kitchen project on Parkway North that he had been turning over in his mind for the better part of a year. The house 2 doors down from his grandmother's that had sat empty and deteriorating and was becoming a real problem for the block. He had been thinking about what to do with it, what the neighborhood actually needed. Not what would look good or photograph well for some announcement. What would actually be useful. What would last? He poured a second cup. He thought about his grandmother at the kitchen table, the sweet tea, the red beans, the step stool, the particular patience of a woman who had cooked every meal from scratch for 60 years, not because she had no other option, but because she understood that the act of feeding someone well was a form of respect. A form of love that didn't need to announce itself. He had carried that into every kitchen he had ever run. He had carried it into CMG, into Henley's, into the 11 properties and the staff and the standard of service that Jeffrey maintained with the same discipline Cedric had brought to it from the beginning. Patient hands make a perfect dish. Today, the dish was ready. He dressed carefully, not because he needed to. Not to perform for Patricia Johnson or impress Vanessa or make a statement that required a particular kind of jacket. He dressed carefully because the occasion called for it, and he was a man who honored occasions appropriately. That was how he had been raised. Dark jacket. His good watch. The one he had bought himself after the 5th property closed its first profitable year. An old habit, small rewards for real milestones, the way his grandmother had always marked real things with something tangible and modest. Shoes that had been shined the night before. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. Same man he had always been, just wearing the right clothes for where he was going. He called Jeffrey at 7:15. Kitchen ready? Jeffrey's voice came back clean and immediate. He had clearly been in that kitchen for at least 2 hours already. You could hear it in the background. The particular sounds of a well-run prep operation hitting its stride. Pans moving. The walk-in opening and closing. Voices in the shorthand that professional kitchen crews develop over years of working together. Yes, sir. Mr. Mitchell. A pause just long enough to carry weight. From the moment you walk in, Cedric held the phone a moment longer than necessary. 7 years. Jeffrey had been in that kitchen 7 years. He had come in at 28 with a grievance and a skill set, and Cedric had given him space to turn one of those things into something durable and let the other one go. Now he was 35, and he ran that kitchen the way Cedric had once run the counter in Orange Mound. With a clarity and a confidence that didn't need anyone's permission, there was something in that worth acknowledging. Worth being grateful for, quietly, on a Saturday morning before getting in the car. "Good," Cedric said. "I'll see you tonight." He ended the call. He picked up his keys, looked around the Germantown apartment one last time, looked at the east window where the light was now coming in full and clear, and Memphis was entirely awake. He thought about the folder named Saturday. He thought about the corner table near the north windows at Henley's, the champagne, the seating arrangement. He thought about his grandmother standing at the door on Parkway North. Go do the next right thing. In the right order, he was ready. He walked out, locked the door behind him, went down to the Civic in the lot and got in and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. Memphis on a Saturday in October, cool and clear and ordinary in every direction. He started the car. He had time. He was not going to Henley's yet. He had something else to do first. A route he wanted to drive. A morning he wanted to let settle before the evening arrived. He drove through Orange Mound. He drove past the building where the counter used to be. He drove up Parkway North slowly, past his grandmother's house where the green door was visible from the street, the roses along the fence in the last of their October bloom, the porch swept as it was always swept. He did not stop. She was up. He knew she was up. She would be in the kitchen starting something from scratch for a meal hours away. That was who she was. He drove to the end of the block and turned around. He looked at the house 2 doors down, the empty one. 3 years vacant. Windows boarded. The lot beside it overgrown with the particular determination of things that grow where they're not wanted. He had been thinking about that house for a long time. He was going to do something with it. Not today. Not this week. But the idea had been forming with the patience of something that was going to happen eventually. The way a dish comes together not from rushing but from giving each element the time it needs. He filed it away. Drove on through Memphis. Past the church on the corner where his grandmother sang in the choir for 40 years. Past the barbershop. Past the dry cleaner that used to be something else. He came out onto Poplar and pointed the car toward Ed Midtoning. He was not nervous. He was entirely, completely ready. The evening would go the way it was going to go. Patricia Johnson would sit at the corner table near the north windows at Henley's. She would have her champagne. She would deliver the remarks she had prepared. She would look at the door at 8:12 and see a man walk through it, who shook hands with the executive chef, like an employer greeting a trusted employee, and then she would understand, all of it, at once, in the room she had chosen without understanding what room she was choosing. He drove through Memphis on a clear October morning and let the city move around him and did not think past the next correct thing. That was the practice, not the outcome. You can't control the outcome. Just the next step. Just the work. Just the patient accumulation of each right action in the right order, potent hands. He was almost ready to use them. At 3 o'clock, he drove back to the Germantown apartment. He did a few hours of work. Operational things, the kind that accumulate during a week when your attention is partially elsewhere. Invoices, a note to the Birmingham contractor, a message to Jeffrey confirming the 8:15 arrival of Lorraine's paralegal, and the importance of proceeding with full normal service regardless of what was happening at the corner table. Dordves runs as it always runs, he wrote. The table is mine tonight, but every other table in that room deserves exactly what they came for. Jeffries wrote back 3 words, understood. Already handled. At 5, he put the work away. He was not a man who paced. He did not rehearse what he was going to say. There was very little to rehearse. Lorraine would handle the legal elements. Jeffrey would handle the room. What Cedric needed to do was exactly what Lorraine had told him, be entirely himself. He sat in the apartment as the afternoon moved toward evening, drank water, read for a while. A history of Memphis neighborhoods he had been working through slowly for 3 months, the kind of book that rewarded patience and penalized skimming. He read 2 chapters without fully absorbing either of them and did not pretend otherwise. At 6:30 he got dressed. At 7 he poured a small glass of water and stood at the east window one more time. Memphis in the early dark. Lights coming on. The city settling into its Saturday evening version of itself. Restaurants filling up. Music somewhere. The particular energy of a Saturday that doesn't know it's about to be part of something. He set the glass down, picked up his keys, walked out. He did not drive straight to Henley's. He took the long way. Through Midtown. Past the house on Harbert that he and Vanessa had looked at before she chose the one they bought. past the corner where the best dry cleaner in the city operated out of a building that needed a new roof and didn't seem to care, past the Memphis Art Museum where he had met Vanessa on an October evening 6 years ago, the city warm, the windows lit, a woman moving through a room like she had been born in it. He had loved her honestly. He wanted to carry that with him into the evening. Not as grief, not as fuel for something darker, just as the truth of what the thing had been before it became what it was now. He had loved her honestly, and he was ending this honestly. That mattered. It was the same discipline he had carried into every kitchen, every decision, every difficult conversation with a vendor or a landlord or a staff member who was talented and wrong about something important. You do things honestly or you do them wrong. He turned onto Madison. He could see the lights of Henley's 2 blocks down. The restaurant was doing what it did on a Saturday in October. Full, warm, the kind of glow from inside that draws people in off a cool street. The exterior was clean and well-maintained because he kept his properties that way. The sign was modest and legible. The planters on either side of the entrance were still in bloom because Jeffrey had an arrangement with a local nursery that he'd negotiated without being asked and had never once needed to be reminded to maintain. Cedric parked a block away. He sat in the Civic for a moment. He thought about his grandmother in the kitchen on Parkway North. He thought about the step stool and the cast iron skillet and the 60 years of patient meals from one house on one street. He thought about the legal pad with its neat annotations, the folder named Saturday, the 3 documents in Lorraine's case that were going to land on a table in that restaurant in less than an hour. He thought about Jeffrey at the pass, about the handshake that was going to carry more information than any speech. He was ready. He got out of the car. He straightened his jacket, and he walked toward the lights, the quiet man's table. The Carter family arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes early. This was Patricia Johnson's way. She arrived early to everything she considered important, not because she was anxious, because she was the kind of woman who believed that whoever arrived first controlled the room. Because she had operated on this for 40 years, and it had served her well enough that she had never questioned it. Tonight it would not serve her the way she expected. The maître, a composed young man named Gerald, who had worked the front of Henley's for 4 years, welcomed them with the warmth that was standard at this restaurant. Not performed warmth. Real warmth, the kind that comes from a staff that has been trained to understand that every person who walks through a door has chosen to spend their evening and their money here, and that choice deserves genuine acknowledgement. Jeffrey had trained the front of house the same way Cedric had trained Jeffrey, with patience, with specificity, with the understanding that the details are where the work actually lives. Gerald led them to the corner table near the north windows. Patricia took in the room as she walked through it. She had been here before, twice, at dinners Vanessa had organized with her family when the occasion warranted it. She had found it pleasant both times. Good food, good service, a space that managed warmth and sophistication without trying too hard at either. She had never thought to ask who owned it. The corner table was set precisely as requested. The champagne was there, a bottle of Veuve in an ice bucket to the left of the centerpiece, flutes arranged at each setting. The table itself was the largest in the restaurant, positioned at the angle of the room that made it feel private without being isolated. You could see the whole dining room from it. The whole dining room could see it. Patricia noted the seating cards she had asked Gerald to arrange. Vanessa at the center, Cedric at the far end, north-facing, positioned so that when the family looked toward him, they were looking past the centerpiece and the champagne and everything Patricia had arranged with purpose. She had thought carefully about the geometry of this evening. She had not thought carefully enough. Vanessa arrived at 8 o'clock. She came through the door in a cream blouse and dark trousers, with the ease of a woman who had been putting herself together for events like this her entire life. She was beautiful. She moved well. She smiled at Gerald with genuine warmth, and he led her to the table, where her mother was already positioned in the chair that faced the door. Victor Bryant was a step behind her. He was wearing a well-cut navy blazer and dark trousers. His posture was the posture of a man accustomed to rooms that assessed him on sight. He shook Raymond Harris's hand firmly, kissed Patricia on the cheek, and accepted a glass of champagne that Patricia poured herself with the efficiency of someone moving through the choreography of an event she had rehearsed. Stephanie Harris arrived 2 minutes later with her husband. Darnell Cooper came in at 4 minutes past. The two family friends, neighbors of the Hayes household for 20 years, A couple named the Washingtons who had known Vanessa since she was 12, completed the table at 8:10, 8 chairs. 7 occupied, 1 empty. The one at the far end, north-facing. Patricia looked at it once. Then she looked at the door. The champagne was poured. Patricia surveyed the table with the satisfaction of a woman whose event was running on schedule. The restaurant moved around them with its characteristic competence. Other tables being served, quiet conversation, the particular ambient quality of a well-run dining room that makes you feel looked after without feeling watched. She cleared her throat. Not a full speech yet. Just a signal that she was gathering things toward her. I want to say before he gets here, she began, that this is a good thing we're doing tonight. For Vanessa. For this family, Vanessa looked at the centerpiece. Victor Bryant lifted his champagne flute slightly, as if testing the weight of it. Raymond Harris looked at the empty chair, at the far end of the table. Then the front door of Henley's opened, and Cedric Mitchell walked in. He came through the door at 8:12, dark jacket, his good watch. Shoes that caught the light of the restaurant's warm interior in the way of shoes that have been shined carefully and recently. He moved through the entrance with no hesitation and no performance. The ease of a man in a building he had entered hundreds of times. Because that was exactly what he was. Jeffrey Lewis was at the pass. He had been at the pass for the past hour, running the service with his characteristic precision, moving between the kitchen and the front of house, with the fluid authority of a man who knows every element of the operation he is managing. He had one eye on the dining room, and one eye on the ticket rail, and the particular awareness of everything in his peripheral vision that comes from 7 years in a kitchen, where attention to detail is not optional. He saw Cedric come through the door. He stepped out from behind the pass, and he walked toward him. Their handshake was not dramatic. It was not performed for the benefit of the corner table near the north of windows, though the corner table could see it clearly. It was simply the handshake of 2 men who had worked alongside each other for 7 years. The kind of handshake that has a vocabulary in it. A full sentence, spoken without words. I've got this room. I've had it all evening. It's yours, Mr. Mitchell. Jeffrey's voice carried into the dining room at the volume of a man speaking normally in a quiet space. Not raised, not projected. Just clear. Kitchen's ready. Lamb is prepared to your specification. Table is yours this evening. A beat, as always, as always. 2 words. At the corner table near the north windows, the champagne sat in its flutes untouched. The table had gone quiet. Not the quiet of a restaurant at a lull in conversation. The quiet of a room that has just received a piece of information it was not prepared for. Cedric shook Jeffrey's hand, thanked him, and walked through the dining room. He did not look toward the corner table as he crossed the room. He did not need to. He knew where it was. He knew where everyone in it was sitting. He knew the geometry of the space. He had walked this room hundreds of times, had stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at every table, had approved every renovation to the space since CMG had purchased the building. He walked to the corner table and stood at the chair Patricia had assigned to him, the one at the end. North-facing, he pulled it out and sat down. He sat in it the way a man sits at the head of his own table, because that was what he was doing. The table was very quiet. Patricia recovered first. She was a woman of considerable composure, and whatever she was feeling in that moment, surprise, recalculation, something she had not yet named, she contained it behind the practiced expression of a woman who does not allow rooms to see her at a disadvantage. She looked at Cedric. He looked back at her. Well, she said, I'm glad you could join us. The particular graciousness of it, delivered with the warmth of a woman welcoming a guest. As if the last 8 minutes had not happened. As if Gerald and Jeffrey and the handshake visible from 20 feet away had been ordinary features of an ordinary Saturday evening. Patricia, Cedric said. His voice was even and warm. Not cold, not cutting. Thank you for choosing this restaurant. He picked up his water glass and drank. Patricia began. She had prepared the speech with care. She had drafts of it in the notes application on her phone. And she had rehearsed the key passages to herself in the car on the way over, and she had reviewed it one final time in the restaurant bathroom while Gerald was organizing the seating. It was a good speech. She was a capable woman, and she had marshaled her capabilities toward this evening with real intention. It began with family, the importance of family. Of people who love each other making difficult decisions together out of that love. Of understanding that the most loving thing you could do for someone was sometimes to help them see clearly what they deserved and what they were capable of. It moved to Vanessa, her daughter's qualities. Intelligence, warmth, capability. the ease with which she moved through the world. The future that was possible for a woman like that. The life she was capable of building. The importance of making sure that life reflected her fully. All of her. It would have moved from there to Cedric, to the gentle framing of a conclusion the family had reached together, and was now, with love and care, prepared to communicate. It did not get there, at 8:14. 2 minutes after Cedric had sat down, 30 seconds after Patricia had reached the part about Vanessa's qualities, the front door of Henley's opened again. Lorraine Mitchell came through it. She was 52 years old and wore her reading glasses on their brass chain and carried a dark leather document case with the settled purposefulness of a woman who had done this kind of thing many times and had no uncertainty about how it ended. A paralegal, a young woman of about 25 with a notepad and a composed expression, walked a step behind her. Lorraine walked directly to the corner table. She did not excuse herself for the interruption. She did not look around the room. She looked at the table and then at Patricia Johnson, and she spoke in the tone of a professional delivering information. Mrs. Johnson. I'm Lorraine Mitchell. I am Mr. Mitchell's attorney. She set the document case on the edge of the table and opened it. He has asked me to be present tonight to make sure everyone at this table has accurate information. Patricia had stopped speaking mid-sentence. The table was absolutely still. Lorraine placed the first document in the center of the table. This is the CMG Hospitality Group financial summary for the preceding fiscal year. Her voice was clear and unhurried. The company owns 11 restaurant properties across Tennessee and Alabama, including Henley's and the building it occupies at 1140 Madison Avenue. Revenue for the preceding year was $8.4 million. She placed the second document beside the first. This is the property deed for 1140 Madison Avenue. This address, held in the name of CMG Holdings LLC, a company Mr. Mitchell incorporated in 2009, 6 years before his marriage. The second document landed. She placed the third. This is the prenuptial agreement executed by Vanessa Carter and Mr. Mitchell in 2018, reviewed by counsel of your family's choosing. It designates all CMG assets as Mr. Mitchell's separate property, not subject to equitable distribution. She closed the document case, stepped back exactly one step. The filing for dissolution of marriage was completed this week. Everything you see on that table is part of the court record. The silence that followed was of a particular quality, not the silence before a storm. Not the silence of shock, which tends to break quickly into noise. This was the silence of a room in which every person present was doing rapid, private arithmetic, and every person's arithmetic was coming up different from what they had walked in expecting. Victor Bryant looked at the financial summary. He was a portfolio manager. He understood financial documents. He read numbers for a living. He looked at the CMG summary with the focused attention of a man who is accustomed to evaluating situations for what they actually are, rather than what they first appear to be. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Vanessa. Vanessa was looking at the centerpiece. She had not moved since Lorraine placed the first document. She was sitting with the particular stillness of a woman who has just understood something she cannot ununderstand. The specific quality of a realization that is too large to process in real time. She would process it later. In a parked car, in a quiet room, in the middle of some ordinary night 2 weeks from now when it came back to her fully formed. Right now she was looking at the centerpiece and not moving. Stephanie Harris had the expression of a woman rapidly reviewing every comment she had ever made at a holiday table in the presence of this man. There were a number of those comments. The review was visibly uncomfortable. Darnell Cooper was looking at his champagne flute. Raymond Harris, who had always been the quietest person in this family, who had sat through 6 years of holiday dinners without once correcting his wife when she called his son-in-law the caterer, Raymond Harris was looking at Cedric. He was not looking at him with the polite tolerance he had deployed across 6 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas Eves and Thanksgiving tables. He was looking at him with the expression of a man who has understood something slowly, over a long time, and is now understanding it all at once. He said nothing. But something in his face changed, and Patricia Johnson, who had prepared a speech and arranged a seating chart and selected a restaurant and ordered champagne and organized an entire evening around a conclusion she had been certain of. Patricia Johnson looked at the 3 documents in the center of the table and then looked at Cedric Mitchell. He looked back at her. No heat, no theater, no satisfaction performed for the room, just the quiet of a man who has spent 20 years in kitchens and understands that a controlled room is never the loudest room. Patricia opened her mouth. She was going to say something. The instinct of a woman who has never allowed silence to accumulate at tables she is sitting at. The reflex of someone for whom composure means filling space, managing the room back towards something she could navigate. Cedric spoke first, not loudly, not with any quality of triumph. In the same measured, warm voice he had used every time he had ever spoken at this family's tables. The voice they had heard for 6 years and somehow never really listened to. Patricia. He looked at her directly. You called this a goodbye dinner. I want you to have it, a pause. Clean, not theatrical. I want you to have the champagne. I want this family to have the evening you planned. He looked around the table. Stephanie, Darnell, the Washingtons, Raymond. His gaze moved without hurry. I want Vanessa to have the life she's chosen. He looked at Vanessa then. She was still looking at the centerpiece. Then, slowly, she looked up. Their eyes met. He held it for a moment, not with anger, not with the grief of a man performing his pain for an audience, with the clear, settled calm of a man who has made his peace with what he is looking at, who has sat with it alone in the early mornings and the late nights and has arrived at the place on the other side of it, where things are simply what they are. I only wanted everyone at this table to know clearly, he said, what that choice actually cost her. He let that land. Then he looked at Victor Bryant, just once. Briefly. Without malice. Victor was still looking at the financial summary. Cedric said nothing to him. He did not need to. The document said everything that needed to be said. The numbers in that summary said it more clearly than any words Cedric could have chosen, and they said it in a language that a portfolio manager understood precisely. He looked at Raymond last. Raymond Harris was still watching him. And for the first time in 6 years, the man who had been politely silent at every holiday table, who had let his wife define the terms of how this family saw Cedric Mitchell, gave Cedric something simple and direct and long overdue, a nod. Just a nod, small. Private. The acknowledgement of one man to another that a thing has been seen correctly. Cedric accepted it the same way it was offered. Quietly, then he stood. He placed his napkin on the table, beside his untouched champagne flute. He pushed the chair back and straightened his jacket. He looked at Jeffrey, who was standing at the pass 20 feet away, watching the room with the alert stillness of a man who has a kitchen running smoothly behind him and is not going to let the front of house drift. Jeffrey. His voice carried easily across the quiet dining room. Thank you. Service looks excellent tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, Jeffrey said. Cedric turned and walked through the dining room. He did not look back. He walked past the other tables. The couple celebrating something near the bar, the foretop by the east wall, the family near the host stand. All of them going about their Saturday evening entirely unaware that something had just been resolved in the corner near the north windows. Gerald held the door. Cedric stepped out into the Memphis evening. The October air was cool and clean, and the street was running at its ordinary Saturday pace. He stood on the sidewalk outside Henley's for a moment, not moving, just standing in the air and letting the evening be what it was. Through the front windows he could see the warm interior of the restaurant, the light, the movement of the service. Jeffrey's kitchen still running, the corner table still there, the champagne, the documents, the family he had known for 6 years, sitting with the information they had just received and beginning, each in their own way, to understand what it meant. He was not happy exactly. Not in the way the word usually gets used. What he was free. Free in the specific way of a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has set it down in the right place and is now standing without it. Not empty, not light, just himself. Exactly himself. Without the weight of the carrying, he walked to the Civic, got in, sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. The city moved around him. He started the car and drove. 5 months passed, the way a long service passes. Each stage completing cleanly, the rhythm established early and maintained, everything moving toward the close. The divorce was finalized in January. Lorraine had handled it with her characteristic directness and competence. Vanessa had retained a second attorney in November. A good one. Someone from a firm Cedric respected, who had reviewed the prenuptial agreement and reached the same conclusion Lorraine had reached in October. The CMG exclusion was valid, operative, airtight. Vanessa received the Midtown house. The joint accounts. The personal property divided according to the terms she had agreed to in 2018, when those terms had seemed theoretical and distant and not quite real. They had been real. The process was completed without drama. There were lawyers and paperwork and the specific bureaucratic weight of a marriage being formally concluded. There was no courtroom, no contested hearing. The prenuptial agreement made those things unnecessary. Cedric signed what needed to be signed. He did not feel victorious. He felt finished, done, clean. Victor Bryant had been present at the corner table when Lorraine placed the 3 documents down. He had looked at the CMG financial summary with the expression of a man receiving a correction to information he had been operating on for months. He had done his own math. By December, Vanessa had moved into the East Memphis house with him. By April, Cedric's accountant mentioned to a professional contact. The information arrived third-hand, not sought. That Vanessa had taken a consulting position that required significant travel. The kind of arrangement that becomes available when the immediate circumstances of a new situation prove more demanding than they appeared at the beginning. Cedric registered this and moved forward. He did not feel satisfaction about it. That was not the feeling. There was no pleasure in any version of Vanessa's unhappiness. He had loved her honestly. That didn't stop being true because the marriage had ended. What he felt was something simpler. The recognition that clarity, even when it arrives late, is still clarity, and that people who evaluate their options using flawed criteria will generally keep selecting flawed options until they change the criteria. He could not change anyone else's criteria. He could only be honest about his own. CMG opened its 12th property in February, Birmingham. The location Jeffrey had been helping him develop for 18 months. A space in the Avondale neighborhood with the kind of bones that rewarded patience and penalized shortcuts. The kitchen had been designed with Jeffrey's characteristic precision. The menu had been built through a process that Cedric had watched with the quiet pride of an older craftsman watching a younger one do the work right. Jeffrey led the opening as its first executive chef, his first solo launch in that capacity. It was strong from the first weekend, not by luck, not by novelty, by the same fundamentals that had made every CMG property work: the right people in the right roles, the right standards maintained without compromise, the right kind of patience applied to the right problems. Cedric drove to Birmingham for the Friday night service. He stood in the back of the dining room for most of the evening, watching, the way he always watched. Not for problems, though he was alert to them. For the quality of the experience, the energy of the room. The thing that either was or wasn't there in a restaurant, that couldn't be manufactured or decorated into existence, that came only from the people doing the work understanding what the work was for. It was there. At the end of the service, he found Jeffrey in the kitchen. Jeffrey was at the pass, doing his final check. The kitchen was winding down around him, the particular organized tiredness of a crew that has done good work and knows it. Jeffrey, the chef, looked up. "You built this right," Cedric said. "From the beginning. Every decision you made in this kitchen over the past 18 months. He paused. "You earned tonight." Jeffrey looked at him for a moment. He was not a man who showed emotion easily. Years in professional kitchens had built in him the same discipline they had built in Cedric. The understanding that feelings are real and useful, and not the same thing as the work, and that the work always comes first. But something in his expression settled. "Thank you," he said. "That means something." "It should," Cedric said. "Because I mean it." He shook his hand, drove back to Memphis that night in the dark, with the highway moving under him and the city coming up ahead, the house on Parkway North, the one 2 doors down from his grandmother's. 3 years empty, boarded windows, a lot beside it that had gone to weeds with the determination of things that grow where they're not tended. Cedric had been thinking about it for a year. He bought it in the summer, quietly, through a CMG subsidiary, without announcement. He hired a crew he trusted, men who understood that the work was the point and the timeline was less important than doing the job correctly. They worked through the fall. New roof, windows opened up, the interior stripped back and rebuilt for purpose. A commercial kitchen, proper equipment, proper ventilation, the kind of setup that could handle volume without losing the quality that made it worth doing. A dining area that could seat 40. A teaching kitchen along the back wall with stations for 6 people to work simultaneously. He thought carefully about what the neighborhood actually needed. Not what would photograph well for a press release. Not what would generate a feature in a local magazine. What would actually be useful. What would last. What would mean something to the people on that block in 5 years and 10 years when the opening announcement was long forgotten. Cooking classes. Weekly community meals open to the neighborhood. A space where the skills his grandmother had been passing down in her kitchen for 60 years could be passed to people who wanted them. The kind of knowledge that doesn't require money to acquire, but does require someone to transmit it. Someone who understands what patient hands actually build. He named it Donna's Kitchen, after his grandmother. While she was alive to see it, when he told her, they were sitting at her kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon in December. He had driven to Parkway North specifically to tell her, not by phone, in person. At this table, he said the name. She sat at very still for a moment. He could see her taking it in. The name, the fact of the building 2 doors down that she had watched sit empty for 3 years, the understanding of what he was proposing to put in it. You named it after me, she said. While I'm still here. Yes. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the December light was thin and cold, and the roses along the fence had gone to their winter state, and the green door was the brightest thing on the block. Most people, wait, she said finally. I know. They name things after people when it's too late to tell them. She looked at him. So the person never really gets to have it. I didn't want to wait, Cedric said. She reached across the table and put her hand on his. She did not say anything more for a moment. Then, this is what patient hands build. It was not a question. That's what you taught me, he said. She squeezed his hand once. Then she got up and went to the stove, because there was something on the back burner that needed attention. And Donna Jackson had never let a pot go unattended in her life. Donna's Kitchen opened on a Saturday morning, in late January. Cedric had kept the announcement small. Word through the neighborhood, a notice at the church on the corner, a handwritten flyer that one of his staff had posted at the community center 3 blocks up. By 9 in the morning, there were 40 people inside. By noon, there were more. Some of them came for the cooking class. Some came for the community meal that Jeffrey had driven up from Memphis to help prepare. His idea, offered without being asked. Some came simply because a building that had been dark and boarded for 3 years was suddenly open and warm, and full of the smell of food being made well. Donna Jackson came at 10. Cedric had picked her up in the Civic and walked her through the door himself. She stood in the kitchen for a long time without speaking. She touched the counter. She opened one of the cabinet doors and looked inside and closed it. She looked at the teaching stations along the back wall and the pots hanging in sequence above the main range, and the cast iron that Cedric had sourced specifically. 12-inch skillets, seasoned properly, lined up on the shelf above the stove. She looked at the skillet on the back burner. Then she looked at her grandson. This is right, she said. It was the highest thing she knew how to say. He met Monica Reed that morning. She was standing near the teaching stations with a notepad, talking to an older woman who had come in with questions about the class schedule. Monica was 38, with a direct manner, and the practical energy of someone who had been doing real work in real communities for a long time, and had very little patience for the version of community development that prioritized optics over outcomes. She worked on the Parkway North Revitalization Project, had been working on it for 3 years. She knew this block. She knew its history and its needs, and the specific texture of what it required that outsiders often got wrong. She looked up from the conversation and saw Cedric watching her. He introduced himself. She looked at him with the assessing directness of someone who evaluates people quickly and revises only when given reason to. You're the one who did this, she said. My grandmother started it, he said, about 60 years ago. 2 doors down. She looked at him differently. Not the way people look at you when you've said something impressive. The way people look at you when you've said something true. When the information rearranges something. How long have you been planning this specifically? She asked. For this neighborhood, he told her the truth, since I was 7 years old. Standing on a step stool in the kitchen 2 doors from here, she looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. That was the whole sentence. Just okay. But the way she said it carried more than the word. They spoke for 20 minutes that morning. His phone never stopped ringing, standing in the kitchen of Donna's Kitchen, with the community meal running around them and his grandmother moving through the space with the ease of a woman who had been cooking in rooms like this for 60 years. They had coffee the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. On a Tuesday morning in May, Cedric was in Henley's kitchen before service. He had been there since 6, walking the coolers, reviewing the prep, drinking his coffee at the pass while Jeffrey ran the morning inventory from the walk-in, calling out counts in the easy shorthand of a man who knows exactly where everything is. The dining room was empty and quiet and golden, with the morning light coming through the north windows. The cast iron skillet was on the back burner where Jeffrey kept it. Cedric stood at the pass, with his coffee, and looked at it. He thought about his grandmother's kitchen and the step stool, and the particular smell of something slow cooked on a cold morning. He thought about the counter in Orange Mound and Ms. Reeves handing over the keys. He thought about the lease in 2009 and the building purchase in 2015, and now the 12th and properties, and now the 12th and Donna's kitchen tables down from where all of it had started. He thought about Jeffrey in Birmingham, about Donna's kitchen full of people on a January morning, about Monica Reed asking the right question and listening to the true answer, about the cast iron skillet that had been on the back burner since before his father was born and had never, in all those years, been moved. He thought about all the mornings, all the patience, all the work done correctly in the right order. He was 42 years old, and he was standing in a kitchen he owned in a building he owned with a staff he trusted, and a business that was built to last, and a community kitchen 2 doors from where his grandmother still cooked every meal from scratch. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. He was exactly who he had been working to become, since he was small enough to need a step stool to reach the counter. Some things, he thought, are worth building right. Some things take the time they take, and the only way to do them correctly is with patient hands that do not rush toward the finish before the finish is ready, that do not mistake the presentation for the meal, that do not confuse the surface for the substance, that understand, the way his grandmother had always understood, that the person who controls the recipe controls the meal, and that the recipe had always been his, from the beginning. Jeffrey came out of the walk-in with his clipboard, calling the last of the counts. He reached the pass and looked up and saw Cedric standing there with his coffee, looking at the skillet. He followed Cedric's gaze. "You want me to move it?" he asked. Cedric looked at him. "No," he said. "Leave it exactly where it is." Jeffrey nodded, made a mark on his clipboard, went back to work. Outside, Memphis was going about its Tuesday. The service would start in 3 hours. The kitchen was ready. It was always ready.